So in today's lecture, we're going to study brain states and introduction to consciousness, focusing on attention, selective attention, and change blindness. So in this module, I'll be defining consciousness, talking a little bit about biology of consciousness, having a dual track mind, and then the really interesting concept of selective attention. So there are many definitions of consciousness. And we can define consciousness as being alert or being awake versus being unconscious. Or we could define consciousness as self-awareness, the ability to think about self. Or maybe it's having free will to make a conscious decision. Or a person's mental content, thoughts and imaginings. To explore the nature of consciousness, though, it helps to come up with a solid definition instead of having all these alternatives. So we're going to define consciousness as our awareness of ourselves and our environment. That's what consciousness is, an awareness of ourselves and our environment. And there are various forms of consciousness, many of which you probably know. Daydreaming. So you're sitting in class or you're listening to this lecture online and you're thinking about being very far away on some beach or with your significant other somewhere tropical or some wonderful vacation that you've been dreaming of. Or maybe you're thinking about, your fantasy person that you want to be with, etc. That's all daydreaming, and that happens spontaneously. We don't really control that. We just kind of drift off and start thinking about other things. And usually we daydream about positive things and not negative things, things that we kind of wish for to come true. Another form that occurs spontaneously is drowsiness. This is right before you fall asleep. And you're getting so tired, you keep yawning, and your eyes are getting heavy, and you're about to lay down, you can't move. You don't want to think, you just want to rest. And someone's talking to you and you have no idea what they're talking to you about, nor do you care. You're just out of it. And drowsiness can also be produced by medication. So you take a medication and you get really tired and sleepy, and that's an altered state of consciousness. You're not alert. You're not, or if you're driving and you're drowsy, you're definitely not alert. You can get in car accidents. All kinds of bad things can happen too. So drowsiness means like you're not aware, you're not alert, and you're about to go to sleep. Dreaming is actually a form of consciousness. So some people believe that when you're sleeping and you're dreaming, you're not conscious. You are conscious. You're very conscious. You're very much aware of your immediate environment as well. You very much integrate immediate, surrounding sounds or stimuli into your dreams. Once I fell asleep with the TV on and the UEFA Champions League game was on, and I was dreaming that I was in the UEFA Champions League. And it was pretty awesome. And I don't know who was playing, but I was dreaming I was there, and it was like really exciting. And then I woke up and I realized that I was not in the UEFA Champions League, so I was pretty disappointed at that point. But dreaming, we always incorporate. I incorporated the TV, what was on the TV. So if you have a horror movie on and you fall asleep, then you're going to dream about horror stuff, right? Horror-related content. So we are aware. We are aware of our immediate surroundings when we dream. So we are conscious. It's an altered state of consciousness, but we are conscious. Some of these forms of consciousness are physiologically induced, such as hallucinations. So seeing things that aren't real or hearing things that aren't real tend to be associated with drug use. So you take cocaine or crack and you start hallucinating, or you take LSD and you start hallucinating, seeing things, and you kind of are kind of a little weary of these things, or maybe you're really happy about them, depending on your experience. Or you can hallucinate when you're chronically sleep deprived. So try staying up for like 5 or 6 nights straight, which is difficult, but something I have done years ago. Stayed up for 5 nights straight, started driving my car, was hallucinating that there was a woman pushing a baby carriage across the highway. Pretty scary. I saw this woman and I was trying to drive around her. I didn't even think about why she was there. But I was so chronically sleep deprived, my brain started hallucinating, which is common. when you're sleep deprived. You haven't slept in days, you're going to start to hallucinate. See things that aren't there, hear things that aren't there. Orgasm is definitely a different state of consciousness, a heightened state of consciousness, heightened state of sensitivity, emotionally and physically. And you can couple that with food or oxygen starvation. So if you starve yourself, you go on a hunger strike, you're going to experience the world differently than if you're not going on a hunger strike. If you cut off your oxygen supply, you experience the world differently. There's actually evidence to suggest that oxygen starvation can heighten orgasm. It's a technique called autoerotic asphyxiation, where people will actually hang themselves or choke themselves temporarily, at least they hope temporarily, to heighten the sensation of orgasm. And many people have died. Some famous people have died hanging themselves, to heighten, in order to heighten their sensation of orgasm. It's a very risky business and not something that should be done. It's too dangerous, but people have gone through all kinds of lengths to broaden their experience that way. And oxygen starvation is one that definitely will work, although it's seriously dangerous. Some forms of consciousness are psychologically induced, such as sensory deprivation. If you were without any kind of stimuli, visual stimulation. So if you were in a very dark, pitch dark room with no light and no sound, your brain will start creating stimulation. So you will start hallucinating, or you will start hallucinating pictures, hallucinating sounds if you were out without sensory stimulation. So if you were in isolation in a jail, solitary confinement, you were just locked in a room with no light and no sound and no food, and eventually your mind would start generating stimuli because sensory deprivation is an uncomfortable state, and the brain will provide its own stimulation to sort of get out of that condition. Also hypnosis, and I'm a firm believer of hypnosis. I've actually undergone hypnosis. Hypnosis is very effective for stress management, anxiety, pain regulation. Very effective. There's even hypnotic dentistry. So dentists that will actually hypnotize you and then work on you, do cavities and root canals without any anesthesia, just under hypnosis, under the sole effect of hypnosis. And it works. The people do not feel pain when they're in a hypnotic state or under hypnosis. And this works for people that are afraid of needles. So they don't want to get a needle in their mouth or in their gums. They're terrified of needles. And they won't go to the dentist because they don't want to get needles. So their teeth are rotting and they're having all kinds of problems. And along comes a dentist and says, I'm going to use hypnosis, no needles. You won't feel anything. And he induces a hypnotic state. They don't feel anything. They get a root canal done, which is quite painful without any kind of, Novocaine or hypnosis. It's extremely painful. You wouldn't tolerate it. They tolerate it. And it's pretty amazing. Once I went for hypnosis for stress management, and I checked my watch. It was about noon, and I sat down for the hypnotic induction to begin. And then the hypnotic induction was over, and I just, I closed my eyes, I opened my eyes when it was over, and I said, that was short. It was about 5 or 10 minutes. And did I feel good? I felt okay. I checked my watch, it was 1:30. It literally felt like 5 or 10 minutes had passed, but in reality, an hour and a half had passed. And I went to move my right arm, and I couldn't. Could not move my right arm, and I could not understand why. It wasn't distressing. I just could not understand why. And it was because he had put me in a hypnotic state, and I literally could not move my arm. And I was not convinced that I would do hypnosis. I was very skeptical. It's not going to work for me. This stuff, no way it's going to work on me. And I was wrong. And I'm a firm believer in hypnosis now. I mean, if you get a really credible person to do it, not everyone's credible. You got to get someone with experience, that it can help you with stress management, anxiety, and a whole bunch of things. Maybe smoking, I don't know. I didn't go for smoking, but it helps with a lot of things. And also with pain management. So hypnosis is definitely another technique that you should rely on. Give it a shot. Don't be skeptical, because it's still going to work on you. And finally, meditation, which is a topic that is very dear to my heart, and I've been doing research on this topic for the last 4 or 5 years here at BMCC. I've run 3 studies examining the effect of meditation on college students' well-being, including their academic performance, their mental health, anxiety, depression, somatization, physical illness caused by mental thoughts, right? Dysfunctional mental thoughts. And I found huge differences, and it really works with the very stressed out population here at BMCC. Meditation works wonders. And so I've compared meditation to a control group, and I found huge differences in meditation. I've also compared meditation in my last study, meditation to a toning group, a group that does a music-based or a tone-based practice. And we're looking at the data for that and should have that soon. But this is very, very effective technique, meditation. And I encourage everyone to participate in meditation. You can sign up for free classes in New York City. Classes are free. NYU has or used to have some classes and some talks on meditation. This group called Dharma Punks has free meditation. They ask for donations, but it's a really friendly community. And what you're learning in the meditation is to be focused on the present moment and not to be future or past oriented. And we all tend to be future and past oriented, myself included. Very much future and past oriented. Future oriented is a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety. Past oriented is rumination, thinking about the past, thinking about maybe the good things of the past and the bad things in the present, and wishing or yearning for the past, or going back and examining the mistakes you made in the past and kind of wishing you can go back and change things. And meditation helps to get out of that state, gets you out of that rumination state, gets you out of the anxiety, worry state. And it keeps you in the present moment. And the technique we use is called mindfulness. So you're focused on the present moment, and you basically note your experience in the present moment. And you try to bring yourself back to the present moment. And it's a very effective technique. And I highly encourage everybody to try out meditation or send me an email, and I can try to get you in touch with somebody that does meditation or help you all out. It's really made a big difference here at BMCC with the people in my studies. The dual track mind. And this is talking about how we encode things differently on different levels, whether we're paying attention or we're not paying attention. So we have a conscious high track where we are deliberately paying attention to a particular object or situation, like problem solving, defining a word, naming an object. What is this object in front of you? You're paying deliberate attention to it, and you're naming it. That's the high track of consciousness. But then we also have an unconscious low track where we're actually scanning our immediate environment for other things without even trying. We're picking up on certain stimuli in our immediate environment without directly paying attention to them. We're not even aware of them. And this is how we process phobias, unfortunately. We don't deliberately try to process a phobia. We do it accidentally with the low track. We may also process some details of the object that we are directly paying attention to without trying. So we're working on 2 different levels here. The high track, what we definitely deliberately pay attention to, and the low track is kind of what we pick up kind of without even trying. So something like your name is very important. We pick up your name. If someone says your name and you're not paying attention to a particular conversation, it will automatically orient your attention that way, because we're scanning our environment for relevant information without even realizing it. That's the low track. So for example, let's say you're asked to name the particular organism in front of you, and you say, oh, it's a bird. That's the high track. You're deliberately paying attention to this organism, and you're actually naming it. However, later on, I ask you details about the bird. So what color was the bird? Or, how did the bird fly? Or what shape did the bird have? And you'll pick these things up. You'll be able to tell me without deliberately paying attention to all these details. You'll pick them up without even trying. That's the low track. You'll be able to identify the color and the motion of the bird without even consciously encoding it or consciously being aware of it. So we have this high track, which is voluntary, that we deliberately pay attention to something, and we have the low track, which is involuntary, that we pick up details without even trying. And we do this everywhere we go. This is also demonstrated in blind people. So you figure a blind person would have, an idea how to navigate a room, especially if they have some awareness of the room. They've actually walked down the hallway or walked into a particular room. But what happens if you put obstacles in the room that the blind person is not aware of? Obviously, he or she cannot see the objects in the room. But if they're now walking down a familiar hallway or familiar room, they will actually go around the object or the obstacles that you've put up for them. Now, it's impossible that they can actually see these objects. They're blind. And it's not like they have experience of the room with the objects in them, because you just put the objects up. You just put these obstacles in the way. So they're picking up these objects or these obstacles in some fashion that we can't really understand. And this is called blind sight. They have some awareness of these obstacles, even though they can't see them or feel them. They will actually avoid them. So that's very fascinating. And that kind of gives evidence to this low track, right? That there's something, we're picking up something in our environment. Even if we can't visually see everything, we still have a sense of where things are. And that brings me to the idea of selective attention. Selective attention is kind of parsing your environment and picking out the important parts that you actually want to attend to. So we have so much stimulation that we can't pay attention to everything. Our brain must choose what to focus on. We have to select what we're going to focus on, and this process is known as selective attention. I can't pay attention to my whole environment, but I can choose a limited amount to pay attention to. And a good example of this is your commute. When you're coming to class, or when you're going to work, or when you're going somewhere in general, and I often commute to work, and I commute with a lot of people from Wall Street. And I don't remember any of them, usually. And that's because I'm not paying attention to any of them. So I saw a whole bunch of people. I saw hundreds of people on my way to work, but I don't remember any of them. They didn't catch my attention. I didn't pay attention to them. So they were kind of in my visual field and then out of the accesses of my memory, since I didn't pay attention to any of them. However, if I chose to pay attention to them, I can only pay attention to a certain number of people. I can never remember everybody, all the hundreds of people that I went to work with. I mean, can you imagine if you remembered all these people that were on the subway with you? Your brain would be completely cluttered. You wouldn't be able to do anything. You'd just be caught up on all these details of irrelevant people that you don't want. So it's kind of good that we can't pay attention to everything, because it would just create a chaotic environment for us. But one day when I was on the way to work, I did pick up a person with green hair. And I actually paid attention to this person because everybody else was like going to Wall Street, and so they were dressed like they were going to Wall Street. And then there was some person with green hair, and I was like, wow, this is different, so I'll pay attention to this person. And I actually remember that person because they were different, and I actually attended to them. And all the other hundreds of people that all looked the same, I didn't. And so we have a limited number of attentional resources, and we have to kind of pick and choose what we're going to pay attention to at one time. And the idea of multitasking, I mean, this is kind of silly. I mean, we're not really multitasking. We're not truly multitasking because we have a limited attentional resource. So when you're at your job and they're asking you to do all these things simultaneously, you don't have enough attentional resources to do that. It's not realistic. We can shift, but we can't do it simultaneously. So the high track is limited in how much we can pay attention to. The low track, not so much. And we can see this with something called the cocktail party effect. So let's imagine that you're at a party and you see a group of people that you know. So you go to the one corner of the room and you're talking to your friends and you're paying attention to their conversation. The high track is going to that conversation that you're having with your friends. Now, on the opposite side of the room, there's more people. You have no idea what they're talking about, right? You can't pay attention to that conversation because you're paying attention to your friends on the opposite side of the room. And we have limited attentional resources. However, let's say you're having a conversation with your friends and all of a sudden you hear your name called from the other side of the room. Now, you weren't paying attention to anything they said, but yet you picked up your name. That's an example of the low track kicking in. So while the high track is paying attention to your conversation with your friends, the low track is scanning the entire environment for personally meaningful or relevant information. There's nothing more meaningful or relevant than your name. So once you hear your name, you reorient your attention. You say, what? Why are they talking about me? Oh, you were talking about me? Maybe they're talking good things. Maybe they're talking bad things. You don't know. You just heard your name, and that sort of oriented your attention in their direction. And that's called the cocktail party effect. So a personally relevant piece of information will then orient our attention in that direction. And that cocktail party effect is due to the low track, picking up personally meaningful stimuli in our environment. This happens when we're driving a car too. Like, you can only pay attention to so much. So do you want to pay attention to the road? Or do you want to pay attention to the person on the phone or the person next to you? And it's dangerous. If you're paying attention to the person next to you or the person on the phone, you're taking some attentional resources away from the road. You can't do both at the same time. So you're driving and then you're talking. So what do you choose to pay attention to? Unfortunately, if you're getting into that conversation, if you're on that phone and you're talking on that phone, then you're not paying attention to the road, and now you're in a car accident. So the best thing to do when driving is don't talk on the phone. And if you're having a conversation with someone, make sure that that conversation is not too stimulating, that you don't have to really pay attention and really think about it, because that's going to direct some of those attentional resources away from driving. And sometimes you need them, because if in a matter of a few tenths of a second, you got to make a decision to hit your brake. And that decision is going to be slowed if you're paying attention to someone you're talking to. So can we effectively multitask? The answer seems to be no. Attention is a limited cognitive resource, and shifts in attention create disruptions in working memory. We see this with older individuals. So no, we can't multitask. Once I was working my corporate job, and I was writing a report, and I was on a phone meeting, on a phone call about something, and I also had someone in my cubicle, and they were all, these people were all talking to me at the same time, and I just couldn't pay attention to everything. So I had to prioritize. I have to say, okay, I'm going to write my report, because that was due at the end of the day. So if I'm writing my report and I'm putting my attentional resources into that, then I'm not listening to the conversation, and I'm also not paying attention to the person talking to me in my cubicle. And unfortunately, when I was on the phone meeting, someone asked me a question, and I had no idea what they were asking me about, and I said something and embarrassed everybody. And I had no idea what I was saying, so I said, oh, I agree with that, or something along those lines, and it was a very detrimental response, because they were talking about implementing a performance improvement plan for the people that worked in my department, and when I agreed with something, I didn't realize I was agreeing to a performance improvement plan, and everybody else was getting mad at me. And now I was like overseeing this performance improvement plan on my entire department. And it was because I wasn't paying attention to the phone call. I was paying attention to the report, and I can't do them at the same time. Now, can you shift? Of course. Young people can shift really quickly. You can go from the meeting to the report, back to the meeting, to the person in your cubicle. You could do that if you wanted to. We can shift really quickly. But we can't pay attention simultaneously to all these different stimuli, because attention is a limited cognitive resource. And the older you get, the slower you are shifting back and forth. So when you call your grandmother or grandfather or uncle or aunt on the phone, and they're in the middle of writing an email, and they get a phone call, all of a sudden they stop writing the email, they answer the phone call, they talk for a few minutes, and they hang up the phone call, and they don't know where they are. They're like, what was I doing? Well, they were writing an email, but they can't shift back and forth really quickly, so they kind of get lost, and it takes them a while to go, oh, I was writing that email, let me go back and finish it. But right away, they kind of get disoriented. And you may see this with older professors. They're lecturing, you ask them a couple questions, and they don't know where they were. They don't know where they stopped. They kind of get lost. It's because as you get older, you have trouble shifting back and forth. So tell your boss there's no multitasking. If they ask you to multitask, say, my psychology professor says there's no such thing as multitasking, only task shifting. And I have a limited number of cognitive resources for attention, so therefore I can't do all this work you're asking me to do. And see how well they take it. Chances are they're gonna tell you to keep doing the same amount of work. At least my boss did, and he was a social worker, right? He still said it has to be done. So you either multitask or get it done somehow. But it's true that we can't multitask. So put that phone down while driving, and please don't text while driving, because that takes even more attentional resources, and you're going to get into a car accident. So if you look at task shifting or rapidly toggling between activities, it's very common. But multitasking, which I said is not really existent, it doesn't really exist. It distracts the brain resources allocated to driving. So if you're doing something while driving, you decrease your brain activity by 37%. That's a lot of brain activity to lose while talking on the phone. So if there's like some accident in the road or there's something in the road, you got to drive around it. If you're on the phone, you're going to hit it. You're going to hit that kid that runs in front of your car. You're going to hit the animal that runs in front of your car, just because you're taking some of those cognitive resources away and putting them towards your phone call. Cell phone use increases an accident fourfold, the risk of an accident fourfold. And crashes or near crashes increase sevenfold when you're dialing or reaching for a phone. And don't be texting, because that data is even probably worse than this. So we talked about selective attention is what we focus on or what we notice. We also have selective inattention, what we don't notice. So if we focus on some things, then we have to ignore other things. Ignoring these things is called selective inattention, but it also goes by the name of intentional blindness or change blindness. What that means is that we fail to notice changes in our environment when we are paying attention to something else. And so there's a couple of videos that I want you to look at that will talk about this concept of change blindness. One is the monkey business illusion, where you have to pay attention to the scene in the game, right? And the other one is the card trick study, where you have to figure out how to do the card trick. So in the one thing, you have to count the number. In the monkey business illusion, you have to count the number of passes the players are making, which is a difficult task. And in the card trick video, you're going to have to figure out the secret card trick, which is really difficult. So you're going to have to really study that one hard. So both of them are cognitively intensive, and so participate in these videos and see how well you do. There's a third study called the door study that I'll have you look at too. And in the door study, basically, people don't realize when a person asking for directions is swapped out by a similar looking person after people carrying a door passes between them. So it's kind of interesting that these people carry a door in between these two people having a conversation, and then one person swaps out for the other person, and the person giving directions doesn't notice. And this is an example of change blindness. They're not aware of the changes in their environment because this person is paying attention to giving directions. They're not expecting that people are going to change. So all their attentional resources are going towards giving directions, and therefore they're unaware of these kind of changes that happen, the bait and switch here. And this is a really interesting study as well, change blindness. And so let's see if you notice the switch.